we have. And I thank everyone for being with us today. So for the last month or so, we had been talking a little bit, or a lot, we've been talking about this idea of happiness and sadness, and that they are states of mind. And the Dalai Lama said that we all have the ability to be happy, but we have to train our minds to do that, Now, this is very interesting because we talk about mind lots, science of mind. The Dalai Lama calls Tibetan Buddhism a mind science. We talk about this thing called mind. We talk about thought. We talk about ideas. We talk about all these things taking place in our head. In our culture, we talk about these taking place in our head. But we really need to come to some sort of a personal understanding of what in the world are we talking about here, because this is literally the most important thing in our lives. It is done unto us according to our belief. Well, if we don't know what belief is, if we don't know where our beliefs come from, or if we don't know how to change our beliefs, even if we don't know where they come from, we can't have any kind of semblance of direction in our lives. We would just continue to repeat history over and over and over again, which is what we see. So Dr. Holmes wrote the Science of Mind textbook, and in it, if you have it, I invite you this week to turn to chapter 2, which is titled Mind, the Greatest Discovery. And think about that, mind, the greatest discovery. Now we could say, well, there's been so many great discoveries in the course of human history. But what discovered them? You see? They were always there, but something within the human being, mind, the activity of thought, discovered them. Dr. Holmes tells us in this chapter that in the biblical narrative of Exodus, Moses was leading the people with a pillar of fire. They had kind of like a big torch on a tall pole in those days in the armies, and they would light a fire on top of it, and then the people in the back could see where that fire was going. In the daytime, they put wet stuff on it to make smoke, and people would follow the smoke. And Moses led the people across the desert with a pillar of fire. And Dr. Holmes says they could have used flashlights because electricity was there at that time. The laws of electricity were always with us. But it wasn't until someone applied their mind, for lack of a better term, someone paid attention to it, that we were able to harness and use the laws of electricity. And what Dr. Holmes is telling us in the textbook is that there are laws of mind, the way that thought works and the way that something responds to our thought. And they are worth studying too, but we have to discover them. We have to make use of them. So this idea then of, well, what is mind and what is thought, And one of my favorite things to ponder is memory. What is memory? When we say, well, memory might be kind of like a record, a stored record of something that we have experienced in the past. And we can say, well, yeah, that might be a good working definition. But where does it go when we can't remember something? How can it be part of us and not be able, we don't recall it? Oh, we're trying to remember that person's name we worked with 50 years ago, and it's just not there. But we know it, but it's just not there. Where is it? Why is it not accessible to us, you see? And then suddenly we're doing something entirely different. We're working in the kitchen, we're cutting the grass, we're doing something entirely different. Boom, there's this flash of inspiration. Oh, I remember that name now. So our thoughts went somewhere. It seems that they went somewhere. And then they came back to us, It's kind of like it's an active thing, Dr. Holmes tells us. But even more importantly, when we begin to pay attention, you see, when we begin to be mindful of what is going on around us, we start to realize that the circumstance divine, this idea of God is like that. It is bigger than we can ever comprehend. It is the ineffable. And some of the prayers from the East start out, "O ineffable one, O ineffable one." An acknowledgement that the best idea of God that we have is incomplete, But we have to latch on someplace. We have to grab onto something in order to get started. And I liken this to, if you've ever seen people carrying plate glass down a city street. When I lived in New York, you'd be walking down the sidewalk, all kinds of things going on. But occasionally there'd be the glass truck there, and the workers were carrying this huge pane of glass to set into a store window somewhere. And they had these little handles with suction cups on them. And they would attach the suction cups to the glass, and that would allow them to grasp the ungraspable, if that's even a word. But they could get a hold of it where they couldn't get a hold before. And they used that temporary handhold to move that glass into place. And then when they were done, of course, they released and let go of it. I think our starting place, our entry point into this exploration of spirituality is like that. In Buddhism, we're given the parable of the raft, that we need a raft in order to get across the river. But once we get across the river, we no longer need the raft. And I think that we take an entry point, we take a starting point into our exploration of spirituality. And we have to grab one. We have to start somewhere. And then as we progress, the idea expands. And where we place that handhold, or how we view that handhold, it might change over time. So Dr. Holmes' entry point was, let's explore this thing called mind together. Let's think about what mind is. Let's think about what thinking is. Let's experiment with this law, this power that acts as law, that responds to us according to our belief. And when we do that, when we start to do that, you see, then we want to know more. Then we want to experience more. Well, as St. Paul said in the gospel, who am I that thou art mindful of me? Why is there something that responds to us according to our belief? Why does this power work? When we were doing prosperity classes, I used to do a prosperity class, and I had it laid out on 3 levels, and the first level I used Think and Grow Rich with Napoleon Hill, and he gave a technique. And he said, now this technique works because there's a spiritual law behind it. But I won't go into that law because you'll think I'm trying to convert you to a new religion, and I'm not. Just know that there's a spiritual law behind it, and this technique works because of that spiritual law, you see. And that's an entry point. Now, if we do that, if we start to work with a technique such as spiritual mind treatment, then we want to know more, see. Who am I that thou art mindful of me? Why does this even work? And then we start to explore our oneness, our unity, our sameness, if you want to call it that, with the divine, that power that created the universe out of itself. How did it do that? It spoke its word, we're told in the scripture. God said, let there be, and there was. And in effect, we say, let there be, and there is in our lives. Our let there be is our belief, you see. So we spend some time kind of working with the law and how the law works and how to be more effective and more efficient in working with the law. And in all the time that we're doing that, we are growing in our understanding of this ineffable thing called God. This ineffable thing called God, see. Now, in terms, just to finish the thought on the prosperity class, when we got to that second level, I introduced Eric Butterworth's spiritual economics, because Butterworth talks all about the spiritual law and what it is and why it works, you see. But then when we spend time learning and growing and studying and experimenting with how do we change our thoughts? What's the best way to do this? Why does this work, and all those things? This leads us then to the actual experience, the mystical experience, I'll call it, the cosmic consciousness. Ernest Holmes called it the experience of unity, the experience of oneness. And there's not a technique that we necessarily need to practice. Our thoughts are our technique, nor is there anything further to study externally, because we are at one with the source that created us. See, so it's a journey, and of course at that level of prosperity, I refer people to Joel Goldsmith's books on spiritual supply. So I just wanted to set that up that says we have to start someplace. And this idea that we start with mind, with thought, with awareness is a good place to start, because that is what makes us unique amongst all of the creatures on the face of the planet. As far as we know, there's some speculation among scientists now that crows might be self-aware. But we have the ability to be aware of ourself, whatever this thing called ourself is. And we start with this idea that we as self, we are separated from all others. But eventually we learn that that's not so true. We are actually one. There's one life expressing itself through many individualized expressions of itself. We are one. We are the same, you see. And then that leads us into this experience of the unity that we're calling the mystical experience. So we ponder what mind is, you see. We ponder what thought is. We ponder what thinking is. And the Dalai Lama says, well, you can be happy by training your mind, And we say, well, what in the world is that? First of all, what is mind? Everybody uses the term differently. So for today, the definition that we are using for mind, I'm using one that I got from something I read in Osho. And he said the activity or the movement of consciousness is mind. The movement of consciousness. Now think about this. We have consciousness, which is pure awareness, just aware, and doesn't even need an external object to be aware of, is aware that it is aware. The blue light consciousness that we learn of in Tibetan meditation. And so when we start meditating, we need an object. We focus on our breath, or we focus on the flame of a candle. We focus on a plant. We focus on something. But after we learn how to focus, how to concentrate, we can concentrate on concentrating. The clear light. No external object required. Pure consciousness, aware of itself. So we have this awareness, and we have this movement of awareness. It shifts from here to there, to there, there, to there. And this shifting, this movement, this activity of consciousness, we call mind. And Dr. Holmes tells us that trained thought is more powerful than untrained thought. There's power in the universe that responds to us according to our belief. But if our activity of belief, our activity of thought, the movement of consciousness we call mind, is flitting here and there and there, you see. And there's this power responding to it. It's flitting here and there and there and there as well. Training our mind, training our thoughts, learning to live, change your thinking, change your life. So as I mentioned many times, and I heard Thich Nhat Hanh say this as well in a talk we were listening to the other week, there's two views, right? Did matter create consciousness, or did consciousness create matter? And the spiritual view is that consciousness created matter. In the beginning was God, and God said, let there be, to put it into the terms of the Bible. That the brain is an organ that consciousness has created and used, but it is not dependent upon in terms of it has to have. We were watching a program, it's on YouTube, and it was a conference at the United Nations, and the title of the conference was How Consciousness Shapes the Brain, which was a very interesting concept, because materialists would say, no, it's the brain that creates consciousness and shapes it. But the title of the conference was all about how consciousness shapes the brain. And different speakers presented, papers or presentations to this. And one of them was a doctor named Henry Stapp, S-T-A-P-P, a physicist, who kind of related the workings of mind to the workings of quantum physics. And I don't know enough about quantum physics to know, if what he's saying is true or not, but it is interesting. But he gave an example of people who had brains that had been damaged through an accident or disease. And it should not have functioned. And yet these people were living normal lives. He mentioned one girl who just got a master's degree in mathematics, and she was very gifted in the area of mathematics. But if they looked at a scan of what's inside her head, those parts of the brain that should be required for that type of activity, they were gone. They weren't there. And he raised the question, if matter created consciousness, then she shouldn't be able to do these things. But somehow she was able to, even with, whatever little bit she had. And scientists talk about the brain kind of rewiring itself to work around defective areas and things like this. Something else is pushing through that. Something else is working through that. And I only bring that example into the discussion today because it might serve as an interesting point for us to ask ourselves, what in the world do I know? What do I know? I've been thinking as long as I know. My entire experience of everything is a result of thought. Even if I smell the bacon cooking on the stove, I'm experiencing that in my thought. I'm experiencing that in the movement of my consciousness. Yes, a smell comes to the sensors in my nose, but then what? Then something has to react to that. And somewhere along the line, like the dog in the commercial, the bacon, 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 the little alarm goes off. And then I start to get fluid in my mouth. It's, oh, wow, bacon. This is going to be a good breakfast. Ooh, you see? But all of that is taking place within. So the talk is, we don't need to go beyond. We don't need to go out there to try to attain anything out there. Spirituality is not an attainment that we succeed or fail in out there by trying to go out there and grab something and bring it to us. Spirituality is something that is already here. It is our very nature. It is what has created us out of itself. And we just need to realize that. And we need to experience that. I'm going to read something to you from the textbook, Science Mind textbook that Dr. Holmes wrote. In the back of the textbook is a glossary of terms, and it's a great place to go if you're reading some of Dr. Holmes' work to just see how is he using this word. And this is with regard to silence. He said the word is used oftener and perhaps less understood than any one word in the terminology of the metaphysician. There is no place we must go for the silence. There is no particular posture we must assume. There is no formula we must repeat. We enter this inner tabernacle by whatever route we may. Some people live in such conscious unity with good that instantly they can turn on and direct the avenues they wish to take, the good to take. Others need to approach by prayer, by singing, by reading a verse from the Bible, by repeating an inspirational poem. If we know that God is forever right where we are, we shall not be reaching out to him in every direction for him. We enter the inner chamber of our mind and close the door on all discord and confusion and commune with our God, our spiritual consciousness, our Father within. Our eyes do not see visions and our ears do not hear sounds. The silence is our communion with Spirit. Our awareness of our unity with good, our understanding that the Father within, he does the work. Excuse me. I'm getting some more water. So we start to think about this then. We start to say, well, as a human being, I can think. But more than that, I can be aware of thought. Right? Because animals can clearly think. But we don't know if they are really aware that they are thinking. But we do know that we can become aware of thought. We can become aware of thinking. And if we become aware of thought, if we become aware of thinking, we can choose to direct our thought. We can say, no, I don't want that thought. I want this thought. No, I don't. Get away. Nope, I don't want that. I want this. You know. So this is why the Dalai Lama said, you can be happy by learning to train your mind. Do more of what makes you happy and less of what makes you unhappy. But in addition to simply becoming aware and directing, we start to get a little deeper. We start to explore these ideas of self. Who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? Where did I come from? And this is like moving from Napoleon Hill to Eric Butterworth in the field of prosperity. So at the first level, we start to learn that there's a power in the universe that responds to us according to our belief. And we start to learn that if we are mindful about what we believe, if we become aware of what we believe based on what outpictures in our life, right? You can't look in the mirror and read what you believe, but you can look at your life and you can ask yourself, well, what would I have to believe in order for that to be true? Once we do that, once we see that working, once we know that that's a fact in our lives, then we start to say, but why? But why? Now, where is the place that we do that? It has to be within. Dr. Holmes tells us that the only place that we will ever find God is within. We will not find it out there. Now, we may be inspired by what we see out there. I am in awe when I look at the pictures from the Hubble telescope. I am in awe when I spend some time sitting in nature, looking at the trees, the insects. But I am experiencing those things within. And we have to learn to stop looking out there, to stop grasping out there, to stop trying to get something there and bring it to us. Goldsmith has a beautiful example of this. He said, if you went into a large office building in a city and you wanted to go to the 27th floor, you'd push the button for the elevator, you'd get in the car, and you'd push the button for 27, and the doors would close. He says, now, what happens is the elevator does not stay in one place and the building come down 27 levels into the ground and the doors open and you get out on the 27th floor. He said, it doesn't work that way. What happens is you have to be lifted up. You have to be lifted up to the 27th floor. And he says that many times in our development or maturing spiritually, if you want to put it that way, that many times what we try to do is we try to bring God down into our human nature to make us have more stuff, better things. Get me a Mercedes-Benz and a color TV and all those kind of things. And what Goldsmith says is we have to raise up to the level of the divine. The only place that we can do that is within, right? Go within, seek ye first the kingdom within. Go into your prayer closet and close the door and commune with the Father within, the Spirit within. And we have to practice to do that. We have to have a practice to do that. So as we turn within, we start to recognize, as I mentioned last week, set the bell, reminder bell on your phone. And when it goes off, you can see, where was my mind? Where was the activity of consciousness? Where was consciousness moving? Was it like a stray dog and I was following it? Or was it directed along some particular line for some particular purpose? Simply being aware, simply maintaining focus. So if the things of life, if the very substance of life as we live it is based on putting our mind on something and not letting it wander, then we have to practice that. We have to practice doing that. So just like Napoleon Hill gave people a technique to produce wealth in their lives, just like an athlete learns a technique to develop their body and participate in their sport, we now have to start to consider ourselves as consciously, deliberately choosing to train our minds, So the first step we talked about last week was awareness, right? You have to become aware. You can't work with something, you can't change something until you become aware of it. You must become aware of it. So you have to learn to be aware. Now this is sort of interesting, because when we first start to do this, there seems to be a conflict that I can either be aware or I can go do something. But I can't have both at the same time. And that's not true. At the beginning it might be true. But as we develop our skill of awareness, then we can be aware in all things, as we do all things, as we go about our tasks, as we do our work, as we perform our job. Brother Lawrence, in his little book, Practicing the Presence, talked about being one with God in the kitchen. His job was a cook in the kitchen for the monastery. And he had a little plaque, I can't remember all of it, but it was something like, "O God of pots and pans and all things." Right? And you see the presence of God, the activity of God in the work that we do. Can we be aware of the miracle of breath coming in and out? How our bodies are able to stand up in gravity. All of these things we can be aware of while we are engaged in our activities. So at the beginning, we get awareness and attention confused. I can put my attention on one thing, but while I am focused on that one thing, you see, there's nothing else going on. But my attention has to flit from here to here to here to here to here to here to here. So I'm constantly kind of scanning and taking in all of the information around there. But if I stop my attention from moving, you see, then I have excluded everything else. So we learn to be aware by giving our attention to something like our breath. But as we develop that competency of awareness, then we are aware of many things. We are aware of many things around us and many things within us. Now, here's another thing to consider, another way to consider this about not trying to go beyond, but trying to get before. Where do we come from? We come from that stillness. We come from that peace. We come from that all-awareness, that beingness. So we are not trying to find it out there. We are trying to find it in here. We are trying to reveal it in here. Many years ago, I watched a documentary. We used to get the cable and had the History Channel, and they had lots of different documentaries. And one of them was about a fellow in England who was a stage magician before World War II. You know, did magic tricks and illusions on the stage. Kind of think David Copperfield, somebody like that. Perhaps not that well known, but that kind of magic. And he got drafted into the Second World War. And you know, what are you going to do with a stage magician in the army? Well, they put him into the camouflage outfit, right? Because if you think about what camouflage is a way of getting the enemy to look at something and see something else, an illusion. Lori and I were out in San Diego one time at a conference, and there was an aircraft carrier was moored in the canal right across from the hotel, the conference center there, and it was putting out to sea that day. So I went to the meetings, and after the meetings were over, we got in a car and we drove up to, I think it's Point Lomas. There's a park up there, a lighthouse. And we drove up that road, and when we got up there, we could look way out to sea and see the carrier. But the camouflage that was painted on the side of it made it look like two smaller fishing vessels. And it was all just done with different shades of gray. So camouflage, you know, a magician knows how to fool people and how to keep people from seeing what's really going on. So one of the things that he did, the British were very concerned about the Suez Canal. They wanted to keep the Suez Canal open to shipping. And if the Suez Canal, for some reason, was destroyed, then the ships had to go all the way around Africa. So they were very concerned because the canal was in range of the enemy bombers stationed in the Mediterranean. And this man was given the task of how to protect the canal. So what he came up with was something that he used on the stage, but it was a series of mirrors that rotated. So you think of it, I think of it the way to describe it as kind of like the blades on a ceiling fan, but they were mirrors that were angled so that a light would shine into them and the light would kind of bounce from blade to blade to blade to blade, and it would be focused up into the air. And it created this kind of flood of bright white light. And of course at night, if there's a really bright light, you can't see what's behind it. You know, it's kind of like a car's headlights coming at you. You can't see the car behind it, you see the headlights, you know. So he came up with this idea, and when the bombers would come, they would turn on these lights and they would start whirling these mirrors around, and the enemy pilots could not see their targets. Now the targets were already there. The Suez Canal was already there, you see. But they couldn't see it because of the activity that was taking place between their eyes and the canal. The peace that we're looking for, the presence that we are looking for, is already within us. It's already here. It is the very stuff and substance we are made of. But we do not see it. In the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas asked Jesus, he says, you keep talking about the kingdom, you know. And remember, Jesus said, seek ye first the kingdom and everything else will be added to you. And the kingdom was within. And Thomas says, where is this kingdom, Lord? You know, you keep telling us about the kingdom. I don't see it. And Jesus said, it's already here. It's already here. Men just don't see it. We wish to be more aware. We wish to realize more. We wish to experience more of that peace that is already here. But just as the magician had these whirling mirrors that reflected the light and distracted the pilots, and they couldn't see what was already there, we have this activity of monkey mind, we call it. We have the flitting of consciousness, the movement of consciousness from here to there, to there, to there, to there. And while it is moving, we don't see what is already there. Another way to put it is the parable we get from the East about the person who drops a precious jewel into a pond. And they immediately stick their hand down in the pond and they start moving it around trying to find this jewel. And as they're moving it around, they're stirring up the mud and they're stirring up the water. And the sunlight is reflecting off the ripples of the water and they can't see down into the water. And the mud is all stirred up and they can't see. But if they stop the activity, if they stop trying to grasp, if they let everything settle, then they can see down into the water and they can see that gem sitting on the mud and they can just experience it. So we have this activity of mind, which is setting up the ripples, which is stirring up the mud. We have this activity of mind, this constant movement of thought, that is like whirling the mirrors and reflecting the light and distracting us from the very thing that we want to experience, the self with a capital S, self, the presence of the divine within us. But we have to train our minds to do that. So one of the things that we can do, okay, how do we stop our mind from flitting from here to there to everywhere, right? First, we become aware that it does that. We try to sit in meditation. We try to pay attention to our breath, something so simple. We try to count from 1 to 5, something so simple. And we find that we can't do that because our mind is all over the place. We're buying groceries. We're calling back customers. We're doing all kinds of things. But we're not present here and now. So once we become aware of that, we very simply bring our attention back to what we were doing. By concentrating by concentrating our attention, we stop that movement. We stop that movement. When we stop that movement, even temporarily, when we stop that movement, we begin to experience the peace, the calm, the presence, the true self that is within. So I'm going to give you one technique, right? Because it's about practice and it's about technique. And I'm going to give you one technique to practice and just work with it during this week. See what happens to you. All of our senses are turned without, right? Our 5 senses are turned without. But what we are seeking is within. It is not beyond us out there. It is before us in here. Before words, it is. Before sounds, it is. Before thoughts, it is. Before ideas, it is. It is this isness, this I amness, this suchness. That is what we are seeking. It is within. So as we sit, you can sit with your eyes closed, you can sit with your eyes open. Bring your awareness to your 5 senses. What sounds do you hear in your ears? Right now, I hear ringing and gurgling with all of the fluid. What smells do you smell? What colors do you see? What do you feel on your skin? Do you feel the chair you're sitting in? Do you feel the temperature of the air? What tastes are in your mouth? And as you just bring your attention and awareness to these 5 different sensory inputs, follow them. Follow them to the center of your being. They all come together somewhere. They all come together somewhere. As I said with the bacon, what you're smelling is not the bacon out there. Your perception of bacon in here. Where is that? So spend some time and try to take your senses and follow them. Follow the sound in from the ears. Where does it go when it comes in? Where does it reach a center? Now most of us, because we are so convinced that our consciousness is in our head, we will think it's up here somewhere. And that's fine. But wherever you get those 5 senses to come together, one of the meditations is to think of a flower with 5 petals on it, and each one a different color. And these are the 5 senses, and they come together at a point. Where is that point? Bring your concentration to that point. Focus on that point. See how long you can remain focused on that point. And if that center is somewhere in your head, move it down to your heart. Move it down to your heart. There's a flower with 5 petals, each of a different color. Each represents your different senses. And they come to the center in your heart. And let your experience of the outside world be filtered through your heart. And hold that for a while. And then move that center down to your navel. Let your awareness and your consciousness be at the center of your navel. Let all of this external sensory input come together at a point. Wherever you perceive that point to be is centering. And this very act of centering, whether it be in your head or your heart or your navel. This very act of focusing, of concentrating, slows down that activity of monkey mind. I've heard it said often that the mind can't entertain two different thoughts at the same time. We think it can. We think we can multitask, but we're actually doing many different things rapidly in sequence, just like a computer chip. When the clock line in the computer chip pulses, it does the next thing. Bring your focus attention to one place and try to keep it there. It's very simple. Mind makes it difficult. Consciousness, thought makes it difficult. It can't be that simple. It's got to be more difficult. I've got to read another book. I've got to listen to another tape. I've got to go to another seminar. That's the distraction. That's the whirling lights. That's the ego trying to keep you from seeing what is already there. The perfection and the love of God, which is the unity of life. See, we're so convinced that we are separated from God and from each other, that we are afraid to lose that individual identity into the universal. So the ego puts up a struggle when we try to do this, distracts us. Just ignore the distraction. Bring your attention back to that center point. Take the five senses. Let them come together. Let your breath come to that center. Let sound come to that center. Let sight come to that center, and smell and taste and touch. What you're looking for is not out there. It is not beyond you. It is before you. Before you think it is. Slow thought down. Bring that monkey mind, if you can, to a standstill. We're close to it. Experience the love that is already there. That is what we're